Hi, my name is Jonna and I play football for Chelsea FC and for the Swedish national team. And you are listening to the Blue Day podcast.
Chelsea!
Fellow Chelsea supporters, here at the Blue Day podcast, I am delighted to welcome this individual on the podcast today. He is a man who 50 years ago this month was part of the 1971 Cup Winners' Cup victory against Real Madrid. Plus, he made 207 appearances for the club, scoring 7 goals. He is a Chelsea icon. Here is John Dempsey. John, welcome to the Blue Day podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Keith. Hopefully you are as well.
I'm very good, thank you, John. Well, John, I'd like to take you all the way back to the very beginning, if I can. Who were your influences when it came to becoming a professional footballer?
Well, I started sort of when I was very little, like 5 or 6, sort of kicking the ball round sort of in the house, and then I used to go up to the corner where I lived. I lived in Kilburn, London. And we used to have a brick wall up there, and I used to go up there with the ball and a couple of mates kicking the ball against the brick wall or kicking it amongst ourselves. So it started at a very young age of being wanting to sort of kick a ball, and I was really interested in playing football. And then as the years grew, sort of like obviously when you're 8 or 9, I got in local teams, and then my dad, who was sporty as well, started taking me to Chelsea and Fulham when I was little, about 7 or 8, and then in them days, like Chelsea were at home one week and then Fulham the following week. So in that way of influencing playing football, I started on my own as such, as kicking a ball round, and then all of a sudden joining little clubs like, and then sort of my dad take me one week to Chelsea and Fulham, etc. So my dad was a big influence, and really in sort of pushing us in one way into football as such, like, you know, and that's how things started for me when I was very young, and then progressed, obviously.
It must have been fun on weekends, as you say, like going Chelsea one week and then Fulham the other week. It was just constant football on a weekend.
I mean, it was a big thing, like, I mean, like when you go back to, well, like before a lot of people were born, etc., and sort of like you know, in them days, like going back in the 50s, 60s, there was not much, you know, young people could do as such. And okay, as well as the older people, they were working, but their main thing was football in them days. And, you know, if you went to a football match in the 50s, it might, you know, it would never happen today. A lot of the supporters, like men particularly, were even wearing shirt and ties, and also wearing, the majority of people wore hats. Which is a strange one, obviously, today. People looking back at that think, really? But if you looked at old clips in the 50s, you would see that amongst the crowd. But, I mean, it was fun as a young person to go and watch, because it was like always full up with crowds, especially at Chelsea, because Chelsea was a bigger ground than Fulham. Fulham was a club near the river, obviously, the Thames, and the small ground, 30-odd thousand. But Chelsea was a massive club in them days, because it was 80-odd thousand sometimes. And, you know, for a young person, your father taking you football one week to Chelsea and one week to Fulham, it was quite exciting to actually do that, really, and to watch really good players at that time. Like, say, for instance, at Chelsea at that time, they had sort of Roy Bentley, later on like Jimmy Greaves, and they were sort of a really, really top team, Chelsea, at that time. And then when you go over to Fulham, you've got different players like the Johnny Haynes and Bobby Robson, etc. And, you know, sort of, you know, for a young person, it was really exciting. As I said earlier, there wasn't much to do for young people in them days, and obviously football was a big thing if you were a young person.
What was Stamford Bridge like as a spectator for you? Obviously, you played there as a player, but not many sort of players that I've spoken to and who have mentioned on the podcast has mentioned what it was like as a supporter. So could you just describe to the listeners who perhaps have only known Stamford Bridge since the redevelopment in the 90s, what Stamford Bridge was like in the 50s?
Yeah, I mean, obviously when my dad used to take me, it was like some games were 60 odd thousand, 70, 80,000. I mean, it was sort of like a huge ground, and obviously in them days, they just had like the East Stand was like seating, the Matthew Harden stand today, that was seats there right in the corner, an old stand, and then where we used to go was the West Stand, where there was no seats, standing up, and like on the terraces, part of them had like crash barriers where certain people who stood there could lean on, or majority of people that had kids, which happened to be me. My dad tried to get me there early so we can get a place so he could sit me on this crash barrier and holding me, and sort of like there was big crowds, and also around that at that time they had a greyhound track and like all grass going around the edge of the field, and a lot of people passed down kids onto that area where they sat on close to where the greyhound track was on the grass. So in them days it was completely different thing obviously to what it is today, but it was exciting times. And obviously then when you were watching Chelsea, so as I got sort of only 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever, to watch the players come out was a big thing. I remember like I was saying to my dad always, I hope Chelsea run out second, the other team run out first, and then when they came out, it was so noisy, like, because they had rattles in them days, that obviously they had the scarves and rosettes on them, but the big thing was the rattles and what a noise that made, and it was so exciting, like, and sort of to watch players of that era, like, was still a big thing, because you're talking about when they sort of won the league in 55, and they had, as I said, like Roy Bentley, Parsons, Peter Braybook, really outstanding players, and then moves on a few, well, not too far, and then you've got the Jimmy Greaves, like, so when you go back there, it was an exciting time to go to Stamford Bridge and watch, and as I said, like, even the shed, was like standing up in them days, and, things change where it's all seater, obviously, now, but it was such a noisy place to go and watch a football match back in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. What was that team like in 1955 that had Roy Bentley, Ken Armstrong, Frank Blunstone, to name a few?
Well, they were an outstanding team, and obviously with Roy Bentley as the centre forward, he was a handful. He played centre half, not for Chelsea as such, but he has played centre half in his career. But he was sort of a powerhouse, very good in the air, and scored loads of goals. And they were such a skillful team as well. And they were, obviously, to win a league like that, sort of like where, you had to play so many more games in them days. Nothing, obviously, there's more competitions, people can say today, but they play less games, like, and in them days, of course, it was like played on most of the time mud heaps, and, and also the fact that the ball with the lace was obviously, you can imagine trying to cross a ball with that in muddy conditions is not the best thing to do, like, and sort of the team of this 55 around that time were an outstanding team to watch.
You've mentioned Fulham a few times. That's where you started your footballing journey. It was January of 1969. Chelsea signed you for around about £70,000. How did this move come about in regards to wanting to leave Fulham to Chelsea? And what appealed to you about going to Chelsea Football Club?
Well, it happened really. I mean, it was about 9 months before that. Nottingham Forest wanted us, and the club wouldn't let us go. Not that I wanted to go, because I never really talked about it. And then, sort of about a little while before I actually moved to Chelsea, probably 3 or 4 months, I think it was. And Johnny Haynes, who was, outstanding player for Fulham, had retired, and then he got the opportunity to manage it as a caretaker manager, and Chelsea wanted me then, but he wouldn't let us go, And then eventually they agreed terms when a manager called Bill Dodgin took over Fulham as manager, and he agreed to let me go. And I was quite excited by the fact that obviously I love playing for Fulham. Admittedly, they were a small club by the river, not a big ground compared to Chelsea. But I knew that Chelsea looked like they were becoming quite a decent team following them. And obviously the thing about being a big club, a club I followed obviously when I was young, even though I went to Fulham, Chelsea, etc. But it was the thing of actually going there. And when I went there that day to meet Dave Sexton, as soon as you walk in the ground, a massive ground, you feel something about the place that this is a club you like to join, and I was all 100% I wanted to join, and I signed on that day. And then I remember coming back to Fulham to get my boots, and then the actual secretary of Fulham Football Club at that time said to me, "Have you signed for Chelsea?" I said I had. He said, "Okay." He said, "But we did get a bigger bid in this morning from Tottenham, and the manager at that time was Bill Nicholson." And I said it wouldn't have made no difference because obviously Chelsea was in my heart, and that's how it came about that I actually signed for Chelsea.
You made your debut for the club against Southampton in a game where Chelsea lost 5-0. We've spoken to Alan Hudson in an interview, and that was the game that he also made his debut for Chelsea. What are your memories of your debut overall?
I mean, it was bad defeat, obviously, because if someone gets beat 5-0, it's really bad. I mean, I must admit I didn't think I played too bad that day, but it was a sort of upsetting to actually have your first match and to lose that amount of goals. You think, gosh, as a defender it doesn't look good, but I enjoyed the debut even though we lost, but in my head I was thinking, hopefully I'll stay in the team and move on to better things, really. But it was, as you rightly said, Alan Hudson, it was his debut as well. I mean, there was 2 or 3 players, like Peter Osgood didn't play that day. He's not making excuses, but in the realm of things, I just thought to myself, right, I've got to move on, and that was it, really.
Yeah, you made 16 appearances in your debut season. That must have been pleasing for you to be integrated in the first team so quickly, whereby you was playing near enough every single game.
I mean, I knew it would be tough, sort of like Dave Sexton, when he signed me, said one of the things we're bringing you because we're very weak in the air at the back, etc. So I thought, well, fair enough, but I knew I was in competition with other great players, David Webb, Ron Harris, Marvin Hinton was there, and obviously Stuart Houston was another player that could play centre back. And I knew it was going to be hard, but I was prepared to work hard. And in the end, I was lucky, really, that everything worked out fine. That I got in the team, and I thought I was doing well, and so I was happy. But I knew it. Okay, it's not like the squads today, how many players they have. Ours was a small squad, but you knew it was competition all round, whether it was up front in defence. You knew you had to work hard to keep your place.
It's the next season where you was able to score your first goal for Chelsea. It was against Wolves in a 2-2 draw. How relieved was you to finally get off the mark for Chelsea, albeit you was a central defender, but you wasn't one to get goals on a regular basis?
I suppose when you go up for corners and free kicks, you're always hoping that you can score a goal, but it was a big relief. And I remember that game because we ended 2-2. And sort of when I scored, I sort of headed it, and the person saved it on the line, and I followed up, and put the ball in the net. It was sort of a really special moment, really, scoring your first club goal for a club that you supported as well. So in that aspect, I thought to myself, oh well, hopefully I'll get some more. But playing Wolves that day was a tough game in any case, because they had Derek Dugan, the big centre forward who played for Northern Ireland as well, and they had a really good team at that time. So to actually get a goal against them, I was very happy.
Before we discuss the FA Cup in 1970, which will be quite a very interesting conversation, I just want to sort of get your thoughts on what the FA Cup means to you as a player. Nowadays people don't seem the FA Cup as a bigger competition like they do with the Premier League and Champions League. So describe to us what the FA Cup as a whole means to you as a player.
I mean, it was a big thing. Even when I was little, sort of like 5, 6, 7, going back all them years, it was a main thing for people in them days because of the fact that it had not much to do. And then the cup final was a big occasion on a Saturday because it's, I forget what time it actually started, but it was an all-day thing, from 9 o'clock all the way through to the game had finished, and afterwards, sort of watching it on the television was a major, major thing, really. And sort of like to actually get into a cup final, to actually play in a cup final was a thing you dream of. Like when I was a little kid, it was the major thing. If you thought, oh God, I wish I could play in a cup final one day, and to actually play in a cup final was a big thing. And sort of, as I said, when you're young, sort of like watching it on television, you're always thinking about, oh, I wish I could play in a cup final like that, So in that aspect, going back all them years to, thinking about cup finals, it was a major thing. And then we moved on sort of to 1971, and to actually play in it, it was a great feeling. And thinking, sort of back to when you were younger, hoping one day you will be fortunate enough to play football, and actually to get that was a big thing, really.
You did actually score in the FA Cup. It was in the 5th round win over Crystal Palace. The highlights can be found online. It was actually on BT Sport for those that are living in the UK. Sorry. When did that squad start to believe that this could be their year when it came to winning trophies like the FA Cup?
I think it was when we beat Birmingham, and then we played Burnley, and we were winning 2-0, and then they came back and got to 2-2, which was a shame, really. But we ended up having to go up to Turf Moor, Burnley, to play the replay, and that we knew would be a hard game, really, because of the fact that small ground usually on a cold, windy night or whatever, muddy pitch. We thought it was going to be tough, but luckily we came through that and went further along, playing other games. But I think that was the time, really, when we got through that round, that we thought we had a great chance. Yes, before the third round comes and you play Birmingham, you think hopefully we get a decent draw, and that was a nice draw to get Birmingham, and then you move on, obviously. But I think playing Burnley and getting through after a replay, then I thought we had a great chance of hopefully getting through to the final and winning it.
Yes, absolutely. Talk about the FA Cup final now. You played in both games against Leeds United. How good were Leeds United as a team? And what were your emotions going into both games as a footballer? Now, I've heard stories about how rough Leeds United were, that they left something on you when it came to tackles. But just as a team, though, what were they like to play against?
I mean, Leeds United were a really tough team, and also very skillful. I mean, obviously at the back, when you got Charlton and Hunter, sort of really two outstanding centre backs, and in midfield you got the Bremner and Giles, who could tackle and go over, sometimes go over the top of the ball like to you and be a bit nasty, but they were tough individuals. Then up front you had the two centre forwards like Jones and Clark, who were really hard as well, and also deadly at scoring. But then obviously you had the Eddie Grays, the Peter Lorimers, and then the Paul Reenies, Paul Madeley's, Terry Cooper at left back, and really, really like what you would call a tough, hard team, but at the same time a very skillful team. And obviously we knew going into that final it was going to be a tough game, but we were a similar team in one way. We felt we were strong at the back, also that we had players that were very skillful, like Alan Hudson, Charlie Cook, the John Hollands, who could run all day, like, sort of up and back constantly. Then up front you got, Peter Osgood, Ian Hutchinson and Pete Houseman obviously on the wing, putting balls in, which was very dangerous at times, especially the amount of goals that he made for Ian Hutchinson in particular. But we knew that we could match Leeds United really in the tough side and also the skill side.
We managed to get a draw. Peter Houseman scored a crucial goal. his name, unfortunately, hasn't been mentioned too much on the Blue Day podcast. So, John, just quickly, how good was Peter Houseman as a player?
Well, Pete Houseman was like really sort of, you would say, really underrated player. Like, I mean, crowds tend to pick on maybe an individual, not so much pick on him, but you could hear the moans or something of a cross didn't go in correctly or whatever. And at times you thought this isn't right. Like, and he was the most underrated player because he was really skillful as well as left wing. He could, if he need be, which once or twice he did, he could fill in at left back as well. But also the fact that he scored goals like the one he got against Watford in the semi-final of the FA Cup run. But his crossing was so good, and the number of goals that Ian Hutchinson scored from his crosses was unbelievable. But he was as well as the football side, he was a really nice man as well, and it was such a sad thing to hear, unfortunately, when he died at such a young age. I think it was 1974. But as a footballer, such a good player, and one of the most underrated players around at that time, really, for what he'd done on the field, was really good.
Just want to talk about the replay, if I can. It was at Old Trafford, Leeds against Chelsea. Osgood scored for Chelsea, he scored the first goal, and then David Webb scored that all-important header. Was it at that stage where it was, we've got this is now our trophy, or was it more wait till the final whistle and then...
I mean, like, in the first game, they should have beaten us, honestly, really, because they had a lot of chances, and if it wasn't for Peter Bonetti, we'd have got beaten, like, really. But, we hung in there, we got a draw, and then we went on to the replay, as you said. But the mindset was that we could, if we can get a draw out of that game after playing not that good really, then we thought we would be in with a great chance. I mean, they are at that time they were a great team, and we knew it would be hard in one match. But then you got a second match against them, even though we struggled probably in the first match, to be honest. Like, in the second match, we went in the mindset we got to do better. And then, suddenly we're into the second match, and they took the lead, but obviously we, came back and deserved to win it in the end. But our mindset was that, we can still beat these, even though they're a good side. That we had the players that are capable of turning the game, just in a one-off game. The players that we had, we knew we could do it. I mean, David Webb we used to go up for corners, obviously, but I suppose sometimes you don't expect, say, the defender to score. It's usually attacker. But David Webb used to score loads of goals going up, like, or he was, as well as a centre half, he was very skillful passing the ball. But actually, to score the goal when the long throw from Ian Hutchinson came in, like, sort of like for him to score, all right, it was about a yard out, nearly on the goal line. But I suppose for some players it wasn't a shock really, by the fact that he was always going up for corners and free kicks, and he had the ability to score a goal, so that was sort of a really big moment in history of, obviously, Chelsea Football Club. When he scored that goal, you knew then you had a great chance of actually winning the game, for us to take the lead in, the sort of first time in 2 matches to actually do that was a big thing. So it was exciting for David Webb, but also exciting for the rest of the team, that at least we were in the lead, and the hope that we would hang on.
When you got your hands on the FA Cup eventually, what was going through your mind at that point? Was this, looking at it, the highlight of your career? How sort of relieved that this Chelsea side, with the quality that you've mentioned, the likes of Houseman, Hudson, Harris, Osgood, etc., was able to lift a trophy, and in the manner it was, against a good side, against Leeds United?
Oh, for me it was really exciting, sort of like, I remember because I was taking all the goal kicks, because Peter Bonetti got injured and had a bad thigh, and I took the last kick, and as I hit it out, like, up to halfway line, all of a sudden the whistle went, and I couldn't see it. Now, such a big relief, and next minute, sort of Ron Harris, David Webb, and myself, and Marvin Inton, who came on as a sub, were on top of each other, and it was such a wonderful feeling that you won the FA Cup, and it was a relief because we hung in there and actually deserved it, especially in the second half, to come back and actually win the game was a massive thing, and it was such an exciting feeling. And also for the noise from the Chelsea fans, you mustn't forget the fans, because they've been at 2 matches, and also to see all the blue and white scarves and the noise was a really, it put the hairs up in your neck, like the feeling of actually winning something, but also winning it for the fans.
Looking back in terms of the Chelsea support, how much did that help the Chelsea team, not just through the FA Cup run, but throughout your time at Chelsea?
Well, it was a big thing, really, to be honest. And yes, when you played sort of like at Chelsea at home, it was the shed end was the ones that pushed the crowd on. And, so I can remember now sort of thinking back, sort of like at home games, as you come out for 10 minutes to warm up, and we always tended to be going down the shed end, and every time you were knocking the ball around, warming up, they'd go through each player, his name, like sort of like Peter, Benetti, and all of a sudden when it came your turn, you could feel like the hairs on your neck rise, and it was quite sort of an excited moment. And going to all the matches that they went to, and away from home, I can think of the thousands that went there. And really, sort of sometimes we're coming back, and then on the train, at the station before we got on the train, the excitement of them all, especially when you won. But I must admit, if we were unfortunate to lose, they were still good. But to actually follow a team on away games was a massive thing to the rest of the team, to actually have such good support. And obviously, as I say, when we were at home, sometimes there was 60,000. Playing Manchester United, sort of the support was really, really sort of a loud thing you could hear, like when you were playing. So, players could appreciate what fans were going through. Not much money, travelling away, and also obviously at home as well. That players were not just thinking about themselves. I think back in them days, because everything was sort of all about football, was like English players, British, if you're Irish, Scottish, Welsh, but it was a man's game back then. Obviously things have changed dramatically, and you move on, pitches, money, whatever it is, you move on. But I still think players from that era, when you think back, there was so many great players in every team, and that's going to the bottom clubs as well, so many outstanding players that I was lucky to play against, and play with, obviously, So to this day, I'm always grateful for what I've been through, and actually to be part of, and to actually sort of, for the fans, to actually, I was one day following sort of like Chelsea when I was little, but actually then to play and have fans cheering you was an unbelievable feeling.
Of course, the next season, yourself and other players made the European debut for Chelsea. You, in particular, made your debut in a 1-1 draw against Aris Salonika. Took me a while to get that right. I had to practice it before recording. You were sent off in this game. Do you remember the incident?
Yeah, I do remember the incident, and sort of when I go back to it, people say, yeah, right, but I should never have got sent off. It was a ball kicked over the top of my head, and I was running back towards Pete Benetti, and he came out on the edge of the area, and the player behind me was trying to sort of come the side of me and kicking out, and he was kicking out at Pete Benetti as he was getting the ball, and I just gave him a little nudge, and then it was the usual, like, sort of rolling over, and I think it was about 35 minutes only gone, and sort of he sent us off, which I couldn't believe, and obviously teammates couldn't believe. And then the next day in the sort of papers in England, they were saying it was absolutely ridiculous. But I thought, gosh, I've been sent off, and now the team would be up against it, like, as such, But they did well, I think, and we drew that, I think, 1-1. But at that incident, that was my debut, and to get sent off was a bit of a shock, really, which I knew I didn't deserve. If I deserved it, fair enough. But in that incident, it was just an unfortunate thing that happened, and so you moved on from there, obviously.
Yeah, and I sort of see it now. That sort of a particular incident, if VAR was in effect, that would have been interesting. We overcame a 2-0 defeat to Club Brugge in the sort of later rounds, but we ended up beating them 4-0 in the return leg. Just sort of quickly, John, what was Stamford Bridge like to play on in European nights?
Well, that game went to 2-2, and then suddenly got 2 goals. But I remember that night was unbelievable, the noise and the atmosphere, and that's one thing in them days, like when you had the lights at night on, the crowd are behind you, it was a deafening noise at times, especially when you were attacking, and if you scored a goal, it was really loud. And I can remember that night when you're 2-0 down, it's a hard thing to come back and actually get beaten 4-0. It was a big thing, really. And later on, we beat Man City, and of course that was an English club in the semi-final, first leg, and I can remember that night distinctly sort of thinking, gosh, what a noise this is like. So European nights were a big thing, and you wanted to be part of it, and I can remember that quite well, really.
What was the feeling amongst the dressing room after beating Bruges, but then beating Manchester City over 2 legs, knowing that you was going to be in a final, and not just any final, but like a European final that did have some prestige back then? What was the mindset of the dressing room, let alone sort of yourself, about what have we achieved here?
Well, I mean, it was a big thing, really. Like, we'd only taken a 1-0 lead to Man City, and as you said, it was an own goal. I think Keith Weller took a corner, and I think it was Healy in the goal, sort of pushed it into his own net. But we knew that would be a hard return leg. To actually go there and actually 1-0 was a big thing, really, and to actually win the 2 legs 2-0 against the team of Man City, who were a good team at that time. And I thought that gave us a lot of confidence going in to a final, and we knew it would be difficult against a top team like Real Madrid, because Real Madrid had a big history going back into the 50s with Di Stefano and certain players, and then to actually come up against a team like that, we knew it would be difficult. But in them days, you didn't know much, really, a lot about what the opposition was you were going to play. You knew they were a good team. In number 1, they got through to a final, so they must be a big team. But in them days, we didn't have the analysis from people that scouting and things like that. So obviously, you were going into a game that you knew that obviously a good team, but we were confident that we could beat them, because we knew we had a strong squad of players that were quite capable of getting goals, and actually, we thought we could do very well in the final against them.
Real Madrid in the final of the Cup Winners' Cup, 19th of May 1971, it was the first game. We had to have 2 games to beat them. The replay was on the 21st of May 1971. John, I've just got a couple of questions on this. What was said in the dressing room by the players before the replay against Real Madrid, knowing that how well you played in the first game? And for you personally, how confident was you after the first game, knowing that Chelsea held their own and all you needed was another top performance against them in the replay?
Well, the thing was that, after that game, 1-1, you think, so gosh, we could have won that, really, But in the end, Dave Sexton said to us, just forget that game, you're moving on. And we knew we had the beating of them, because we should have beaten them in the first game. Obviously, you can be not too overconfident, but we knew that we had the beating of them, and they were a good side. They had a forward called Mancio, who was a dangerous player, and 1 or 2 others. But at the end of the day, even I thought to myself we could beat them with the players like Ozzy, etc., that you knew they could get us goals. And Dave Sexton gave us the confidence of going into the next game, of it telling us really that you're the better team, so let's follow on and finish it off. That was his attitude, really. And at the end of the day, we did play very well in the second game. So obviously winning it was a big thing. So really, we knew it would be hard, but we knew that we had a team to beat them.
You scored the first goal of the replay game on the 21st of May, which ended up Chelsea winning the game 2-1. Describe to the Chelsea supporters, if you can, John, that particular goal that was scored for those that perhaps have not seen it, and what that goal and the actual occasion meant to you as a person and as a player.
Well, I mean, the goal I scored was like Charlie Cook took a corner and then I was just inside the penalty box about 15 yards out, and then I headed it and the goalkeeper punched it out, and then as it came out I just thought, I'm going to hit this, and I hit it on the volley and it went in the roof of the net. But obviously, 9 times out of 10 or whatever, it may not have done, it could have gone over the bar or whatever, but to see it hit the roof of the net was an unbelievable feeling, especially for a defender, obviously, and to hit one on the volley is, you never expect to score like that, but it was such an exciting moment. And sort of like you get goosebumps thinking about it. When I do see it on YouTube or on a video or whatever, it brings back happy memories. But also to think, oh, you scored in the European final was a big thing as well, obviously. So that was a really exciting moment, and the feeling of actually scoring a goal was a big thing, really. Like, especially for a defender. Yes, attackers scored the majority of goals and score them on a regular basis. So for a defender that doesn't score a lot of goals, then it becomes a sort of a big thing, really.
Looking back now, how significant was this victory for the players in that squad, the club itself, but also for English football as a whole?
I think it was like, for the football club, number one, it was the first time they ever won a European trophy, so that was a major thing for Chelsea Football Club. And obviously you move on and you're hoping that the years go by and you win more trophies. For the actual country, you knew that you had teams that, whether it's Chelsea, Manchester United, Leeds, at that time, and in Scotland with Celtic, who were a big club, that given the opportunity they could win trophies, and it was like an incentive for other teams that, here, Chelsea win it, and you played against a big club like Real Madrid, who've got a history of winning things. And for people sort of playing for top clubs at that time, they must go through their mind thinking, well, we could do that if Chelsea can do that. But for Chelsea, it was a major thing, first sort of winning an FA Cup, but then a European trophy was a massive thing. So it was pleasing that, for the club we won it, for the players that part of that club, but also not forgetting the fans that, a lot of people tend to forget that, at the end of the day, they're the ones, without the fans, there wouldn't be a football club. There wouldn't be football players either. And they're the ones that have to travel, thinking about that game. They travelled out there for the first game, not expecting to have to stay there 2 days later, to actually have a replay. And I think back to then when some of them didn't have any money, and remember we had a whip round to give some money to some fans that were sleeping on the beach, and also tickets that we didn't really need as such, but the tickets were given to fans as well, and sort of, I mean, yes, we were playing, all right, the wages were nothing like they are today, but sort of like the fans, without them you have nothing, the club has nothing, and people should remember that the fans are the ones that are following you, and they follow you everywhere, whether it's to Russia or wherever. And this time it was out in sort of Athens, and some of these people, you've got to think about their work and they have to go back, and others are so much Chelsea that they're staying out there and they haven't really got nowhere to stay. So at the end of the day, it was a big thing for Chelsea Football Club. It was a big thing for British clubs that they could think, oh, we can get into one of these if we're lucky, if we play well. And also, as I said about the fans, without them there'd be nothing.
I think that certainly rings true, especially after what we've seen with the whole European Super League and the backlash from football supporters. seeing that and listening to your stories about fans sleeping out, trying to get a ticket for the game, it just goes to show the passion that people have for their football club, and football club owners and directors should remember that.
Yeah, definitely, without doubt.
Fast forward, if we can, to 1972. There was two particular bits that happened that I'd like to talk about. The first one, the team made a record. I actually do have the LP somewhere in the house of Blue is the Colour. What are your memories of doing that with the Chelsea lads?
I remember us going to recording studios of the people who sort of made the record and produced the record, etc., down in Holloway, in studios down there, and practicing singing it. And it was a really catchy tune, and it was quite a fun time actually doing it. And we'd done that for quite a while, a few hours, and then eventually, sort of like moving on, we got on to Top of the Pops, obviously, in that year of 72, and sort of, you know, got in the top 20, which was a big thing, obviously, in them days, because obviously Top of the Pops was played every, I think it was Friday night for half an hour, and actually to get on there and sort of to actually sing that song, which was a really catchy tune, and obviously they still play at Chelsea Football Club today, 50 years on, and sort of like they were happy memories actually to actually make a song that I never thought would go on for 50 years, but it's amazing when you think back and you think, gosh, I was part of that song, you know, and I can still hear it, you know, obviously in my head sometimes, and obviously when the teams come off, it's usually played at Chelsea, so you know, when we think back, I suppose we're pleased that we actually made it for Chelsea Football Club and the fans.
John, in 1972, Chelsea was in another final. It was the League Cup final where we played Stoke City. We lost the game 2-1. Looking back, how disappointed was you with this result, and what was the mindset of the team after this defeat?
I mean, I think myself personally, we should have won the game. We had enough chances. I mean, Gordon Banks saved a lot that day for them, and we should have really beaten them. And I remember when Chris Garland was completely through, and then he took him out, but they said like that, oh, he's saved by Banks. But I always think back to them days and thinking, you know, they never sent a player off back then, really. But he took him out, or else we'd have got, you know, we made it 2-2 at that time. But on that day, it was very disappointing because the fact that, you know, it would have been the third trophy in a row that we would have won. So, you know, when you've finished the game and the whistle goes and you know, you're thinking, gosh, we should have won that, and you get a bit upset. The fact of the matter that, you know, it's a bad loss as such, but on the other hand, Stoke had good players, the George Eastoms and people like that at that time were really outstanding players. But, you know, it's just a sad feeling at that time, and of course then you think about moving on sort of from there, 1972, and then all of a sudden things change, and, you know, sort of like all the players at that time, obviously in their mind they were probably thinking, oh, we got the next season to move on to better things as well, because 3 seasons of getting to finals was a big thing for any football club. I mean, even if they got to one final in 3 years, they think they've done well. For us, it was a case of like hopefully moving on to better things, but then all of a sudden things started to change gradually, and then I think it was 1970, even then wasn't it, I think 1972, 73, started rebuilding of the East Stand, and then things started to change from there onwards, really, as such, not for the better.
Yes, we've talked about the good years of Chelsea. Well, unfortunately now we've got to sort of go down a little bit and talk about the dark days of Stamford Bridge, and obviously the decline of your time at Chelsea. In the next couple of seasons, the club largely underachieved in the league and in cup competitions. John, what was your personal thoughts on this? And looking back, when did you notice for example, the wheels starting to come off with this team and, in fact, the club itself?
Well, I think really sort of like when, sort of there was one or two problems, like, and Peter Osgood left and Alan Hudson, David Webb, then the team started to disintegrate, like, as such, and you were losing sort of a lot of the better players as such, really. And I'm not saying the stand building of 72 onwards or whatever caused a lot of the problems. That's nothing to do with it. At the time, the team was not playing 100% great, but losing players of that calibre obviously didn't help matters, really. And it's just, you can think of it all them years back and think to yourself, if only we kept that squad together. But there was, one or two fell out with Dave Sexton, like, etc. And that didn't help matters, like, really, and made things worse. But obviously, around that time, you're thinking to yourself, like, after winning 3 trophies and losing some players, like, you think, oh gosh, can we get out of this? Like, which was at that time was a sad feeling, like, really, because we had such a strong team that I thought we would get better and better. But these things do happen, and it's just unfortunate that did happen at that time. But I was hoping that things would turn around, really, but they didn't.
Well, it obviously left a big hole when Osgood left. And then subsequently you had other players that were to leave. I mean, Alan Hudson, on the top of my head, was the other one that left around the same time as Osgood. And as you say, there was an unfortunate turn of events at Chelsea because, as you say, you were able to be in finals 3 years in a row. And then all of a sudden, when certain decisions are made where Stamford Bridge has to be redeveloped, and then there's not enough money to go for both on stadium and team, there is going to be some consequences to that. So,
well, I suppose, no one knew the full reasons why. Yes, you could say it was something to do with the stand because that become an expensive thing. I think there was an industrial action by the unions, and it stopped the building of it for at certain times. So costs go up, but it was just sad that that they unfortunately left the club. Yes, as I said to people before, that Dave was such a great coach. Probably the management side wasn't his thing, really. The coaching side he was great at, but when you're dealing with strong individuals like Peter Osgood and Alan Hudson, etc. Some managers may be able to cope with it better than others. So, you can say different things, but I suppose no one at the end of the day know fully really why the club decided to sell these players, because they was exceptional players, really, and move them on, which was sad at that time because they were part of a group of players that you felt could go on to better things.
I want to talk about as well, in 1974, Dave Sexton left the club with Eddie McCready taking over the role on a permanent basis. What were your thoughts on the decision at the time, and just sort of touch on Eddie McCready for us?
It was sad, really, sort of like Dave Sexton leaving, because obviously he signed me. So in that way, yes, but I understood from the club's point of view, if they felt that they needed a change, then obviously there was nothing you could do about it. But from my point of view, he signed me and gave me the chance to play for Chelsea, which I'll be forever grateful. Sort of like with the Eddie McCready taking over, obviously it was a new thing for him, and I just thought, will he do it? Like, to say, like, will he become a top manager? But he brought in the youngsters, and like Butch Wilkins, Ray Lewington, Ian Britton, Tommy Langley, Teddy Maybanks, all these younger players that I can think of in my head. And then he mixed it in with some older players as well. And it proved that he did a good job, and he got a promotion. Unfortunately, whatever happened, him not staying, he left the club and it would have been interesting to see what he would have done as a coach, after one season or whatever he was there, because he did a good job and proved that he had the capability, and he changed everything around and by bringing in young players, and it proved him right, really, because he did a good job.
You mentioned Ray Wilkins, John, a young player coming through the ranks at Chelsea during your time at the club. What were your thoughts on him at the time?
Well, you could see, through the youth team into the reserves, the skill he had, the passing ability he had, and you knew that he was going to eventually become a top player. He's just capabilities were outstanding on the ball, the way he controlled the ball, the way he passed the ball, and at a young age he was directing people, you think, on the field, telling them where he wanted the ball with his hands, and you knew then that this person had the capability to become a top player, which proved to be in the end. And when you think back, and he was captain of Chelsea as well, and then obviously moved to other clubs and developed into a greater player, and obviously playing for England as well, which was a big, massive thing. So, in that aspect, I knew that he would always be a top player, and it proved to be the point, really, with him.
In your opinion, John, was you surprised when Ray Wilkins got the captain's armband so early in his Chelsea career, considering the more experienced, established players in the team?
Yeah, I was surprised that he actually did get it, really, because at that time you still had Ron Harris around and whoever. But obviously, to actually give him the captaincy, like Eddie McCready, he knew that in his eyes, obviously, in other people's eyes as well, he knew that eventually this person was going to be the leader of a team. You could look at today and think, well, believe it or not, Mason Mount could be a captain in the future for Chelsea. Obviously, the fact of you can see an individual, like I said earlier about Ray Wilkins, in sort of playing and training, and you could tell he was a leader, that eventually one day he knew that he would turn out to be really good. But obviously captain of Chelsea, I suppose, would be a surprise to a lot of people when you got experienced players still at the club. But obviously a manager thinks, well, no, I think I want him as a captain because he's capable.
Was there any animosity aimed at the young players by the more experienced names in the squad because their spot might get taken? Was there any issues there?
Not in my eyes, there wasn't. Obviously when you're older, you think you should be in the team maybe, but if a young player comes along and he's got the ability, then obviously I'm sure players would realise they got to be given a chance. In our days, I said earlier, the squads are quite small. They're not like 20 odd players today, So back then, I think players were sort of knowing full well that if you're not playing well, then you don't deserve to be in the team, and that's it really. Yes, it doesn't give you, God-given right that you should be playing every week and you're not playing well just because you played in the team for 10 years. Didn't really matter. If someone's betting you at the time, then you'd have to accept it. Yes, you weren't happy and you were probably upset, but at the end of the day, then when you sit down and look at things, then you realise, well, actually, they are better than me at this moment.
Yeah, and you did touch on it earlier about the club being relegated in 1975, 4 years after winning the Cup Winners' Cup. What was going through your mind at that point of your career with Chelsea, knowing that they were going to be in the second division?
I suppose it was hard to take, really, because you always thought you'll be in sort of like Division 1. You class yourself as a top team, and it was quite upsetting to actually get relegated. And at that time you were playing against what you felt were lesser teams. You're not playing against the Manchester United Leeds, but I suppose you were also thinking that you've got to try and get back out of this division into the division where you belong, because Chelsea, to get relegated, was a big thing back then, because they were a big club, winning winning 2 trophies and getting through to another final, and really belonged in the top division. So really most players who were brought down with the club like into the next division was really, I'm sure I was definitely, but I'm sure the other players were upset and also convinced that they needed to get back up quickly as possible.
How crucial was it for Chelsea to get promoted quite quickly from being relegated in a couple of years before that?
Yeah, definitely. That was the mindset, really, that everyone knew the club was such a big club that playing in that division wasn't accepted, really. Like, they have to make every effort to get out of there and play well and need to be back in the top division. I think it was a relief that Chelsea were back up, and also the fact that, they're back where they belong, and also the fans want to support a team from the Division 1 aspect. But obviously, Eddie Mack had built a young side, so I think they knew it'd be quite a hard thing to actually bring so many young players up into that division. But at the same time, getting back was the priority. So, the mindset was really about, oh, well, we're up, we got to do well, at that time. So it was a big thing, but it was going to be a big challenge for a young squad of players, really, at that time.
You ended up leaving Chelsea to play football in the United States. How did that move come about, and what sort of details can you give us of your departure from Chelsea?
That happened at the same time me and Charlie Cook were coming to the end of our contracts, and Ken Chiletto was in charge at the time, and he spoke to us both and told us that they wouldn't be renewing our contracts, and sort of that would be the end of our Chelsea career. So, things have moved on. The team was a lot younger. So, I mean, at first it comes as a shock because you always think, oh, I want to play for Chelsea, but you've got to realise that time moves on, and like both of us knew that we had to move on, and then obviously sort of I moved on to Philadelphia Fury, and Charlie Cook moved on to Memphis, Tennessee in American football. But it was a sad day because, you look back when you were young and you support Chelsea and you play with Chelsea, and then suddenly it comes to an end. I suppose when you're playing, you never think it's going to end. But obviously it sinks in, and then, it's a sad day. But then obviously you move on, but you still got Chelsea in your heart and hope that they do successfully. And that's how it happened, really. I'd had two or three injuries. I got over one, and then another one came, and it can happen like that, And sort of towards the end, I wasn't playing much. I was injured, and the contract was coming up. If I'd been playing regular, then it might have been a different thing. But I accepted it as it was, and it was probably the right decision by the club, really. That yes, the contract, and they weren't renewing it, so I accepted it.
Just a couple more, John, before we do let you go. I've mentioned this to a few ex-footballers who have been spitting feathers over it, with their discontent. John, just want to get your thoughts on VAR, please.
Well, it's a difficult one, Keith, because you think, when you look at it, the correct thing they get right all the time, obviously, is when the ball over the line, they started with that, and obviously with the referee's watch on his arm, he can see straight away if that ball's over the line or not, and that's 100%, but then you come into these things where it's borderline with, even though we don't like Tottenham, the Harry Kane against Leeds the other day, I was praying it would get chalked off the goal, and it was. But really, these instances with a 6 inches of a boot, a slight arm is a bit, really up in the air, really, because you think yourself it should be clear and precise. And it's, I suppose, when they go to VAR and then you think they haven't given the decision and it should be the other way. Everyone has their own opinion, obviously, but when it's pretty obvious that that should be allowed, sometimes you're amazed when you see VAR decisions. And of course, if it's for Chelsea, you're going to be biased. I understand, that. And some of the decisions you think, I remember thinking back when Chelsea played Tottenham, and I think it was Dissel, I forget his name now, that the midfielder for Tottenham. This also the Spanish bloke when he trod on Cesar and they had a VAR and they couldn't find nothing wrong with that. And then when Bashwari got a boot from Maguire, these instances just become a joke. And this is obviously people say you're biased because you're Chelsea, but at the end of the day, you can see instances where it's clear cut that these should have been sent off or whatever. But in the ones where they're drawing a line along, sometimes it's pretty obvious, like that they're making the wrong decision. So I don't know how they're going to get, they're never going to do away with it, obviously, I wouldn't think, but it's very difficult, for the referee. Okay, you can go over to the screen and have a look and then make a decision, but sometimes they make the wrong decisions. But then some people say that maybe when players pack up football, maybe they should go into, to be a referee, and learn the trade and do it then. But even though they played football, doesn't mean to say they won't make the same mistake. It is a difficult one because everyone is going to be supporting your own team in these instances, aren't you? And when you think, oh, I've got away with one there, whatever, then, when you look at the Sterling one the other day, it's sort of like, yes, it might look like a penalty with him and Zuma, but then on the other hand, as some people say, should he have been on the field from the 30-odd minute when he stuck his foot up with Werner as such, One has their opinions, because Man City supporters will say the opposite of what we would say, but they need to improve it somehow, but it's a difficult one. Everyone, I suppose, has an opinion, don't they? Like the pundits on the telly say one thing and someone else says something, and next referee, so no one is exactly getting this right, are they? So either they come up with new things or something that's more clear cut, sort of like, it's a difficult one, really.
John, final question from me. How do you look back on your Chelsea career?
I look back on it and think to myself, I was fortunate to join such a great club as Chelsea, obviously moving from Fulham, and lucky to be part of a club that produced great players when I joined, obviously, and sort of to actually win an FA Cup, a European Cup, and this Cup, to get a goal, at least we're part of Chelsea's history and probably the start of it as such, especially the European part. The 1955 team won the league, but then since then things have moved on. But my thing is the fact that playing with such a good team that we had in them days will always be in my memory forever, obviously, and to actually be part of a club that had great support and has great support today. And I can remember, as I said earlier, all the fans at home and cheering us on, and actually travelling with us was a tremendous thing, and winning the cup, FA Cup, and then coming back to Euston and travelling back to Fulham Road. It's actually all through the streets and to the town hall, winning the FA Cup. And the same when we came back from the European Winners' Cup final at Heathrow, and then I can remember coming Kensington High Street, Kings Road, then down Fulham Road, back to the town hall, and all the thousands of fans and blue and white. That brings back happy memories. So I look back on my career really fondly, and the fact that I was fortunate to play for a club like Chelsea, which I'll never forget, and I'll always be blue as the colour.
Brilliant way to end it. John, absolutely delighted to have you on the show. Thanks for your time, and hopefully once COVID is eventually gone, we'll hopefully see you down at the bridge again someday.
Thank you. I'll hopefully be back at the bridge soon with my boots.
Yes, absolutely. Chelsea should at least give you the first 45 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, Keith, thank you very much, and all to the fans. Thank you.
Chelsea!
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.